Well, folks, thank you all for being here. I'm Harold Mock, the Director of Georgia College's Leadership Programs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Usery Forum on Leadership. This afternoon, we have the pleasure of hosting Jane Kidd. Before we begin, I must say that this event is being recorded. By participating in this program, you are consenting to being recorded. If you would prefer to view the recording instead of participating, please leave this meeting and email leadership.programs@gcsu.edu. But that said, none of you want to leave because you're excited to be here, right? We are honored to welcome Jane Kidd to present in our Usery Forum on Leadership. Catherine Smith, who is our Usery Fellow, will introduce Mrs. Kidd momentarily, but allow me briefly to say a few words about this event. The Usery Forum on Leadership is Georgia College's presentation discussion series on leadership for the public good. The forum honors the memory of the 15th U.S. Secretary of Labor, W.J. Usery, Jr. The series is made possible through the generosity of his family, especially Mr. and Mrs. Melvin and Elise Usery. With that said, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Secretary Usery for two reasons. One, we're here celebrating his legacy and some of the good that he left in the world, but also because Mrs. Kidd will be honoring his legacy with her comments later, talking about leadership and labor and the public good. Secretary Usery had a unique ability to bring people together in the name of ideas and causes bigger than themselves. He was a master of helping people to find the common ground. He served across 5 U.S. presidential administrations, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, each of whom came to rely on his ability to bring people together. He negotiated some of the most difficult labor disputes of the 20th century, and he did that by listening to people, by speaking honestly, by inspiring a shared vision, and helping people to see a brighter future by what they could build together. And that's precisely what we hope to discuss here this evening, led by our presenter, Mrs. Kidd. I'd like to acknowledge a few of our special guests who are with us this afternoon. Mr. and Mrs. Melvin and Elise Usery, who are joining us virtually. Members of our Leadership Advisory Board, Mr. and Mrs. Tom and Sandra Rossiter, Colonel Tom Torrance, Pam Booker, Mr. Alex Gregory. I'd also like to acknowledge some of our guests who have joined us virtually. Dr. Baruz Sethna, who's a mentor in our Georgia Education Mentorship Program. Gary Marks, who is the CEO of Piedmont National and also a mentor in our GEM program. We're joined by guests online, and I want to thank you all for being here and say that I hope that our conversation this afternoon will help you to remember what you love the most about Georgia College, that we have so many opportunities to come together and to talk and to understand big ideas. We hope to host you again on campus very soon. Most of all, students, as always, I'm glad to see you. You all look so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as my mother would say. Glad that you're here, and I'm really glad that you're going to learn from such a distinguished presenter and someone who has proven such a wonderful leader on behalf of others in her state and in her profession. Whether you are joining us here in the Magnolia Ballroom or you're joining us online, we encourage you to follow us on social media. So you can go ahead and pull your telephones out. So you can go and pull them out, and if you don't follow us, you can follow us now at Lead Creatively. And if you're old-fashioned like me and use Facebook, type in GC Lead Creatively. If there's anything that you hear that interests you or that you want to respond to, we hope that you'll use the hashtag #ForThePublicGood. Students, you have heard me say this before, but there's nothing that we are going to discuss today that could not be enriched by a regular reading of a major national newspaper. Georgia College provides all of you a free subscription to the New York Times. You can scan that QR code that you see up there on the screen, and I've tested it. In under 60 seconds, you can activate your subscription to the New York Times. I'm twice as old as you, so imagine how fast you could do it if you to scan that QR code and get your subscription activated, your subscription to the New York Times. You can also type in accessnyt.com and select Georgia College from the drop-down menu. I will point out as well that in addition to the New York Times, Russell Library maintains many subscriptions, dozens of subscriptions to great newspapers, magazines, and periodical, and now is the time of your life to develop a healthy news diet. These are some of my favorites, and those of you who have seen my office know that a lot of them are sitting on the floor right when you come in the door. I will always, always, always help Georgia College students to read and learn from the newspaper. So if you want to figure out how to do that, come see me and we will do it together. With that said, again, I want to thank you all for being here this afternoon, those of you here in person and those of you joining us online. I'd like to welcome Catherine Smith, who is our W.J. Usery Jr. Fellow, to introduce our guest, Mrs. Jane Kidd.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce Mrs. Jane Kidd. Mrs. Kidd's career spans more than 30 years in public service and higher education. She was elected to the Georgia House of Representatives in 2004 and represented the 115th District in the General Assembly. She served as chair of the Democratic Party of Georgia from 2007 until 2011. Additionally, she served 3 terms on the City Council of Livonia, Georgia, and as campaign manager and district director for U.S. Congressman Don Johnson. An experienced communicator and public relations professional, Mrs. Kidd served in executive leadership roles at Clemson University, the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication, and Piedmont University. She served as vice president for the public relations firm Gerung Associates and as director of development for the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. Kidd began her education at Queens College, now Queens University, in Charlotte, North Carolina. She holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Georgia, where she graduated with honors. Additionally, she holds a master's degree in instructional technology from Piedmont College, which is now Piedmont University. Kidd is the daughter of S. Ernest Van Diver, Jr., 73rd Governor of Georgia, and grandniece of Richard B. Russell, Jr., who represented Georgia in the U.S. Senate for nearly 40 years. Her great-grandfather, Richard B. Russell, Sr., authored the original bill in the Georgia General Assembly to establish Georgia College. He later served as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Georgia and remained president of the college's board of directors for nearly 2 decades. Russell Auditorium is named in his honor, and Georgia College's library is named for her great-grandmother, Ina Dillard Russell. Kidd and her husband David live in Crawford, Georgia, and have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Jane Kidd to our Usery Forum on Leadership.
Well, it's my real pleasure to be here, and it's exciting to see all of you. Some of you I've met, some of you I haven't met, some of you I can't remember your name, so you must repeat your name when you speak with me, but I'm very glad to be here, and I appreciate you coming. As I've said before, it's an honor and my pleasure to be the Alex Gregory Leader in Residence here at Georgia College. I have big footprints to fill, but I'm looking forward to the days ahead. Actually, later today, during this program, I'll ask Alex Gregory to come to the stage and describe something very special that he worked with when he was at YKK. But I'm going to look back today at work, the activity we celebrate on Labor Day, but most likely do at least 5 days a week from the time we turn 18 to the time we decide we've had enough. Retirement is different for all of us. Our health, our stamina, our age, or maybe the desire to do something new affects when we decide to hang it up. It also determines when we choose or are forced to end our so-called careers. So there are three interrelated entities that that influence how we experience our work life. And I'm thinking about the laws of the United States. I'm thinking about collective bargaining with unions, and private companies sometimes do things a little differently, which is, of course, probably what makes them so good. And over the history of the U.S., workers and laborers have naturally been concerned with their workplace safety and fair compensation. The history of labor disputes in America substantially precedes the Revolutionary War. In 1636, for instance, there was a fisherman's strike on the island off the coast of Maine, and 12 carmen were fined for being late and going on strike in New York City. The actions taken at that time were ruled against the law. The only known case of criminal prosecution of workers in the colonial era occurred as a result of a carpenter's strike in Savannah, Georgia in 1746. So before the American Revolution, unions, or they called them combinations, were illegal. And it was England's common law found that workmen in combination were not permitted to use their collective bargaining power to obtain benefits, and that it was a criminal conspiracy to collectively ask for higher wages. But in 1842, there was a law case called Commonwealth versus Hunt, which settled the legality of unions as long as they were not acting in illegal ways. It removed the stigma of criminality from the labor organizations. So really, I thought that was pretty interesting. I didn't know that. I love to do research, and I like to know where things start from. But through the 1800s, unions were formed in America to advocate for workers. And the Industrial Revolution brought on a lot of need for these unions, because if you think about it, the growth of the railroad system, the growth of all the mechanization and equipment and all the things that people had to run, a lot of it was even dangerous. And that's why I really wanted to mention workplace safety, because before there were regulations and before there were unions fighting for quality workplaces, people were stuck up on the 10th floor of a building with no fire codes, and the fire starts, and hundreds of people died all over the country when those kinds of industrial accidents happen. But by the second half of the 1800s, much of the labor force was a member of the union. So it was almost universal in America. And with the growth of the industrialized nation came a great inequity between the richest and the poorest in America, thinking tycoons. So from 1860 to 1900, this is just an example of how things were. The wealthiest 2% of American households owned more than a third of the nation's wealth, while the top 10% owned roughly 3/4 of the nation's worth. The bottom 40% had no wealth at all. In terms of property, the wealthiest 1% owned 51%, while the bottom 44% claimed 1.1% of wealth in America. Sometimes I think we're getting too close to that myself, the way things are today, but I'll leave that for another day. Since this is the Usery Forum, and Secretary Usery was the 15th. Well, first I'm going to go to another Secretary of Labor. I wanted to mention that the first Secretary of Labor was William B. Wilson, and he was named by President Woodrow Wilson in 1913. And that was the first time that was a cabinet-level position. And that was right before World War I began. And at that time, nearly all labor unions were strong supporters of the war. They used their leverage to gain recognition and higher wages. It minimized strikes as wages soared. People were upgrading their manufacturers to be ready for the war and to keep factories running smoothly. President Wilson established the National War Labor Board in 1918, and that forced management to negotiate with the existing unions to be ready for this war and to be prepared. The AFL unions and the Railway Brotherhood strongly encouraged their young men to enlist in the United States Armed Forces. And so guess what happened? Women came into the workforce, and they were taking the traditionally men's jobs in large numbers for the first time ever in American history. And then there was a short recession in 1920. Except for that recession, the 20s were pretty generally a prosperous decade outside of farming and coal mining. You can think of these intensive labor jobs that in farming and coal mining that were always still very difficult and right on the margins of making a profit and supplying for America. But of course, some of you know, the stock market crashed in October of '29, and that ushered in the Great Depression. And by the winter of 1932-33, the economy was so perilous that unemployment rate hit the 25% mark. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. But what I want to tell you is about this time, there was an American workers' rights advocate from New York and a loyal supporter of her longtime friend, President Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and her name was Frances Perkins. And I've read a biography of Frances Perkins, and she served as the 4th United States Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945, the longest serving in that position. Of course, that was because FDR stayed in office longer than any other president had ever stayed. But she was one of 2 Roosevelt cabinet members who remained his entire presidency, and she was the first woman to serve in a presidential cabinet. In 1933, she presented Roosevelt with a long list of labor programs for which she would fight, from Social Security to minimum wage to fire regulations. It's what we would call OSHA today, and it was really earth-shattering. And as you've heard about the New Deal and all the things that happened to our country at that time, all of these things were put in at that time that made our workplace better and safer. Then you fast forward to Secretary Usery. He was the 15th United States Secretary of Labor, serving from '76 to '77, and he, according to Dr. Mock, was known as a formidable but fair negotiator. He received 5 appointments to national service from both Republicans and Democrats, and he was a fine gentleman. As a matter of fact, I love seeing that photo of him because my father had pants like that. Those plaid pants were just wonderful. His cigar was a little smaller than that, but his pants looked just like that, and I promise you they were polyester. So guess what? We come, fast forward to today, and the job is not done. Of course, we're more progressive, and we know a lot more than we did during those times. But the country and the world will need leaders like you to take us into the future and ensure that our workplace issues are addressed. One of the issues that is really critical right now is child labor and workplace safety. It's still an issue. According to a recent data from the Labor Department, child labor violations have nearly quadrupled since 2015. And that was the low point in 2015, and leading to injuries and deaths on the job. Recently in the New York Times Magazine, they told a harrowing account of a 14-year-old boy, Marcus Cox, whose arm was nearly torn off while working at a Purdue slaughterhouse on the eastern shore of Virginia. Under federal law, those tasks are strictly off limits for anyone under 18. But because of all the risk involved, He admitted to lying about his age to get the job, but it was well known in the workplace that he was underage. And it turned out that he was hired by a staffing agency who then hired workers for the plant. And so that vigilance to make sure you're not breaking laws was kind of broken by that staffing agency. And the same practices were happening nearby at a Tyson-run plant. In July of this year, 16-year-old Devon Robert Thomas Perez died after getting entangled in a machine that he was cleaning at a Marjack poultry plant in Mississippi. And the shift was overnight. He was going to school during the day and working at a poultry plant at night. And he died. In 2020, a 16-year-old Gustavo Ramirez was doing construction work on a hotel roof in Tennessee, and he fell 160 feet to his death from the top of the building. So under federal law, and then agriculture is carved out and is a little different. Under federal law, children must be 14 to take on a tiny handful of jobs on a farm. And there are limits to what hours they can work. But in June 2023, some House members, just recently, are seeking to bring those children into the conversation with a bill that outlawed 14-year-olds. Well, it would raise the age from 12 to 14 and rectify a decades-old standard. So the standards need to be standardized, and more work needs to be done. Guess who's got to do this for us? It's you. And I know you're all aware of the recent Hollywood writers' strike. They finally reached a tentative agreement that could end nearly 5-month-long strike. They were the Writers Guild of America, and they evidently got a very good deal. And they should have. The world has changed since the last contract that they had. And we are streaming, we're doing reruns on streaming, and none of those actors and writers were getting residuals from that work because it was new and it wasn't written into their contracts. And as you also know, the United Auto Workers are currently on strike, and everybody's hoping that that's going to end. So these kinds of things have not changed that much since the beginning of unions and workplace issues, but it's still a problem and it still needs to be worked on. And I see you out there. These and other problems need to be addressed. The other thing I was really thinking about, happiness in a job and what makes us happy for life. That's written into the Declaration of Independence that we're supposed to find some happiness, freedom, justice, and happiness. And so beside workplace safety and wages and work-related issues, work satisfaction has kind of moved to the forefront in the last several decades. And I call it safety and respect. Listen to this, 1/3 of your life, now you're students, but once you graduate or once you finish your education, this is what you're facing. 1/3 of your life is spent at work. The average person will spend 90,000 hours at work over their lifetime. So, what do we need? Work-life balance. It's something that millions of people try to achieve. Some can balance their lives with ease, and others just can't seem to master it. Some people call themselves workaholics. They never go home. Or when they go home, they're back on their phones or their computers still working. And then some bosses will call their employees over the weekend and ask them questions, which is actually their work, and asking for expertise on whatever it is they do. So work-life balance refers to how one manages both their work and their personal life. For example, someone with a healthy work-life balance prioritizes their personal life, like their family, and their work. So that's 1/3 of your life is spent in the workplace. So in essence, if one has a good work-life balance, they will not let work run their lives, and they'll devote specific amounts of time to their work and to their loved ones. So overall, having a work-life balance will improve almost every aspect of your life. In the 1970s, I was doing a lot of work with business colleges in the United States. The firm that I worked for colleges and universities, and the colleges of businesses were hot. I mean, everybody was going into business, and it was very competitive, number one, but the topic was leadership and organizational management. Those theories were abounding, and actually it goes on until today, too. You can go to a self-help store or any kind of bookstore, and you can see shelves and shelves of how to direct your organization in a way that makes your employees happy. So, how to help employees be happier at work, which of course would make them more efficient, more cost-effective, and more profitable. It was at that time that I heard about quality circles. And I mean, we're talking the 70s. That was the big deal, quality circles. There was a physicist named Dr. Deming, who was American, and he took that to Japan. And the Japanese adopted this whole idea of letting everyone working on a certain project talk to each other all the time and make improvements. How can we save this? They were trying to eliminate waste, and a lot of things were just thrown away. The defects were over here, and you were spending a lot of time making defects. And so I thought of that when I thought of this at home. I was in the band in high school, and about that time, actually it was in the 50s, well, it was actually older than, I'm not that old, in the 60s, late 60s, and I was in the band, playing the flute, and a local textile manufacturer asked us to come and play because they were kicking off this new campaign, and we were so excited. We were playing under a tent on a grassy field, and everybody was standing around, and the big theme that day was 0 defects. And we took that home for the band. I mean, we were a good band. We rated A's and superior in the competitions that we were in, and I was the drum majorette on the football field. And so before we went on at halftime, I'd walk down the line. We'd be in the end zone in a long line, and I'd walk down going, 0 defects, 0 defects. So, I mean, I learned about quality circles and 0 defects early in my life, and now I realize that, that's what that was. In that manufacturing plant in high school, they were kicking off this new campaign that was very similar to the concept of quality circles. And actually, I have read most of those self-help books about management, and Peter Drucker came out, and Stephen Covey, and now Brene Brown, who's wonderful, and I've read all of their books, and it's all based on, are your employees happy? Do they feel engaged? Are they feeling fulfilled? Are they valued by your company? And that's really where we ought to be today. That is where we are. We can use American laws, and we can use regulations and unions to try to even things up and make the workplace safe, and to also make wages fair. But how to make you happy? How to make you, and you've heard this, I know. Nobody gets to the end of their life and wishes they had worked more, right? You don't go, oh, I wish I'd gone into the office more. Well, all of that, kind of takes care of itself most of the time. So I think workplace happiness is kind of the next frontier of how do we keep young people and the future leaders of this country engaged and happy, and have them have a work-life balance, and because we know they'll be more productive, right, and more profitable for your business. So I really think that's an innovation that we're all going to see. It's not new, but it's going to keep evolving as we go around in the business world and really in our lives too. So what I wanted to do is I'm curious, I'm very curious. I haven't talked to Alex Gregory about the methods, organizational methods that they had at YKK, but I've heard about them, and I want to hear more, and I want to learn about them because it sounds to me that they're focused on workplace happiness. They're focused on how do you engage your employees, how do you make everybody feel valued by your company, and therefore put out the best product that you can possibly give. So I wanted to ask Alex if he would come forward and tell us a little bit about what's going on at YKK and how you know so much about that. Here. I'm going to take this off, probably make right here. Come sit right here. Don't fall off the stage. Is this on? It is. Okay, so I kind of threw this at Alex today. But I knew he knew it. Dr. Mock and I talked, and he's given presentations on this before, and he knows it pretty much by heart. As a matter of fact, he pulled something out of his pocket when I asked him about it, so I think he's prepared. So will you tell us what goes on at YKK and why people are happy to be there?
I've never heard Jane speak, and she's never heard me speak, but you're really singing my song, and I appreciate that. According to the Gallup organization, they do a survey in 55 countries, and they have found that the number one determinant of happiness is not wealth, it's not even our health. The number one determinant of happiness is having a, quote, good job, doing something meaningful, working with people you care about. So that is my mantra when I speak to students. Instead of starting salaries, they need to be looking for a good job, doing something meaningful, working with people they care about. So that I learned that a few years ago, and at YKK we had always tried to be a good company. The founder, Tadao Yoshida, founded it on the philosophy of the cycle of goodness. No one prospers without rendering benefit to others. And he consistently ran the business that way, and certainly when he asked me to, when his son, he had passed away, asked me to lead the North and Central America region, I tried to keep that at heart. And so from 2002, when I became president, up until 2016, we talked a lot with our employees about our corporate culture, our core values, our management principle, these kinds of things. It wasn't until October of 2016 that I heard David Friedman speak. I was so lucky to hear that. I was 2 years away from retirement. I was 68 years old, and David Friedman asked, what is corporate culture and can it change? His answer was, corporate culture are the values and principles that show up in the everyday behavior of the people. It's not just that corporate philosophy or the mission statement or all that. It's the values and principles that show up in the everyday behaviors of the people. And can it change? Yes, it can change. Your job as CEO, Alex, is to keep it moving in a good direction so that the corporate culture reflects that philosophy. Well, how do we do that, David? And he said, let's talk a little bit about behaviors. So I summoned our 22 leaders from across the region to Atlanta, and David led us in a discussion of what are the behaviors you would like to see in all of your employees? What are those wonderful behaviors that reflect the philosophy? And that day we came up with 37 fundamental behaviors, and 3 of us over the next month whittled that down and wordsmithed it from 37 to 25. What David has you do is spend a week in every company from Canada to Central America to Colombia, South America, talking about that week's fundamental behavior in every meeting that you have. And every week a message goes out from somebody. So to make a long story short, we came up with 25 fundamental behaviors. This was not rehearsed. she started talking about it. Can you say something? I said, coincidentally, I have our 25 fundamental behaviors in my pocket. We don't ask anybody to memorize anything. It's just most of our, I was at a meeting downtown at Georgia Tech the other day with our new head of cybersecurity, and I was telling someone about it, and I said, oh my gosh, I forgot mine. And he reached into his pocket and pulled his out. So I said, you just scored some real points with me. But it's a lot of thought went into these fundamental behaviors, and they start off with things like do the right thing always. Okay, well, you could sort of stop with that one. That says it all. But what our employees say is now when they walk through the factory or their office or even their neighborhood and they see a plastic bottle, they used to just walk by the plastic bottle, but now they say, I need to do the right thing, you know, and they stop, they stop and pick it up. Clarify expectations, then respond quickly. And what our employees say is, gosh, I used to tell someone I would call them soon. Soon to me was this Friday. Soon to them was an hour. So now I say, I'll call you this afternoon at 3 o'clock, whether I have the answer or not. But the important thing is, in every meeting that we have, we discuss that week's fundamental behavior. I just can't tell you the communication, the improvement and the engagement and all the wonderful things you want to enjoy with your employees, and you want them to be proud to work there, and this has helped us to do that.
I'm going to ask some questions, and then y'all can ask some questions. But does every office do the same value the same week? So everybody's talking about the same
fundamental behavior. Every week on Monday morning, a message goes out from someone. The first 25 were from me. This is what, for example, one of them is show appreciation. That week I was with my 100-year-old mother, and I had to write it, and I wrote it about my mother. And I had so many employees come up and say that meant a lot to them, you know. So every week we start off with reading a message from someone in the company about that week's fundamental behavior. And then every meeting we talk about it for about 5 minutes at the start of the meeting. And people say wonderful things about things going on.
So that really humanizes every person around the table.
We have learned so much more about each other and what's important to us than that opportunity. Just maybe it existed before, but we were not so good at it. But and again, the point I make to students is I was 68 years old before I learned this. What an advantage to students to go in to begin their careers. Just think of the discussions they can have with their boss or their president and talk about corporate culture. What David Friedman taught, and I ask students to remember this if nothing else, is leaders drive values. Values should drive our behaviors, and it is the behaviors that drive the culture of any organization. Leaders drive values, values drive the behaviors, and it's those behaviors that drive the culture. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I know I've heard a presentation by, and you may have heard John Miller. Yeah. And his kind of thing is always the question behind the question. And it's all about customer service. But he even talks about someone picking up the trash. And I still, when I see it on campus, you know, I looked the other day and there was this styrofoam takeout thing turned over, and I thought, somebody needs to pick that up. Well, the question behind the question is, what am I going to do to make that better? Which means I just go over there and pick it up. I'm not waiting on somebody else to do that or take responsibility for that kind of thing.
Somebody told, I've been retired 5 years, somebody said, Alex, we talk about you often in our meetings. I said, really? They said, yeah. Everybody remembers that you cleaned out the dishwasher every morning. So, you know, it's nice to be remembered for something.
Well, and Alex is very modest, but those kind of, the whole thing that I would not ask someone to do something that I was not willing to do myself is a value, I think, of everyone's responsible for everything and the quality of what's happening. And if you notice something, then it's your responsibility to fix that. And go ahead.
Well, we do a lot of other, my goal was to have only good managers from Canada to Colombia, and I don't think we ever achieved that goal, but we had a very active hotline, and we told our employees constantly, if you saw something you didn't like, or if you felt you were being treated unfairly, call that hotline, and you can be anonymous, or you can give your name and you'll still be protected, and we will investigate every claim. And we had, in every compliance committee meeting that we have, the legal department or the HR department talks about all the hotline calls that they've had, and they've been investigated thoroughly, and sometimes there's no merit to the complaint. Other times, people have either received additional coaching or possibly even lost their jobs. So we really care about the employees, and we want them to want to come to work. More people die on Monday morning than any other time of the week. They don't want to go to work. And we don't want that to be our employees.
Well, and the old saying of one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. And that's what happens if you have someone that doesn't rise up to the level that you're looking for.
By the way, I thought Harold was going to be sitting here interviewing you. Y'all really set me up today. I wasn't expecting this.
No, I said you were going to come on stage and do this. But I do think it's time. Harold was going to kind of moderate if you have any questions of Alex or of me. If you have any questions about anything, you're welcome to ask something, and Harold will bring you the microphone, so we'll make sure we hear it. It's always very difficult to be in a crowd and not be able to hear the questions that somebody asks. And then you're always, trying to figure out what in the world did they ask.
So if you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll bring you a microphone.
Thank you.
Sometimes somebody has to give it a start.
That's Leighton Scott, my mentee this year, so I'm nervous. Right? You have a question for Ms.
I actually have a question for you, Mr. Gregory. Sorry. Throwing you under the bus already. But kind of a question on adopting these new principles for your entire company is a kind of a big change. So how did you motivate your leaders and ultimately your employees to kind of get on board with this, even if it might, from their perspective, mean more work for them or more on their plate?
Excellent question. Thank you. That was the big challenge and my concern. Remind me of that in a minute. I'm going to say something else first. When we had those 22 leaders from the company in the room, I told everybody I was not asking YKK's headquarters in Japan for permission to do this. I wanted this to be ours. Whatever we did, I wanted it to be ours. Japan would have said, why 25? Why not 3? Something like that. So we did it, and that following April, that was in February. In April, I went to a meeting in Japan, and I had these cards. We call them wallet cards, and I had these made up in Japanese, and I showed them to the leaders of the company, top people in the company, and they loved it. They applauded us for taking some risk and doing something outside the box and something that related to the philosophy. And then they invited me back a couple of months later to speak at a symposium in Japan. And then when I retired, they invited me to go to China and Turkey and Singapore and Hong Kong and Japan and a bunch of places to talk about the program that we did here. So it was a big success. Now to answer your question, my concern was how do we get everybody aboard? David Friedman says it has to start from the top. Like when I would go to a company to talk about this, if the leading person is not there, we're just wasting our time. It's got to start from the top. He or she has to be committed to doing this. And then you have to hold everyone accountable. We lost some people in management because they were not committed to these 25 fundamental behaviors. But we made coaching guides for some of our frontline supervisors who might not be comfortable standing up and leading a discussion about showing appreciation. So we made coaching guides for everybody. We explained everything as carefully as we could. We incorporated it into our evaluation system. Were they doing what they were supposed to? First of all, were they living, the fundamental behaviors, but also, more importantly, perhaps, were they leading the discussions in their group, wherever it is, of the behaviors. We did a benchmark survey of all of our employees. Dr. Snowden there, we were talking about this kind of thing earlier. We did a benchmark survey to test things like engagement and the things you'd want to improve through a program like this, better communication, better understanding of the philosophy and all that. But it took at least a year to feel like we were reaching all the employees and that everyone was doing what she or he was supposed to do to lead the discussions and all. But we, believe it or not, our customers got the biggest kick out of this of anybody. We had very big, serious customers where our folks would call on them. My successor had a big meeting with a customer, and he started the meeting. Do you mind if we take just a minute to talk about our fundamental behavior? And the customer was so impressed. I had a group of engineers from a major automotive manufacturer, and we had a discussion of it, and they were so impressed. So it took a while, and it still takes a while. We're in our 13th iteration of discussing all 25 fundamental behaviors. And the momentum has not waned a bit. Everybody's still, you would think someone would say, we need to change this, but there are 25 there enough to, by the time you get to the next cycle, people are ready to talk about that topic again. And another thing I've been so pleased to see was Jessica Cork, who is our Vice President of Communications. She's the champion for this, and she gets all the written messages that everybody sends out. And she says people take it so seriously. They want their message to be the best and meaningful and interesting, and so they spend weeks working on it and sending it to her, and how about this? So there's so many different aspects of it that have been a pleasant surprise to us. So thank you for the question, Leighton.
Any other questions?
So for students, for either one of you, but specifically Mr. Gregory, if that's okay. For students that are exiting college and going into the workforce.
I'm sorry.
For students that are exiting college and going into the workforce, what advice would you give for those students who are searching for meaningful jobs? How would you define that?
Yeah, I'm asked that question a lot. I don't have the perfect answer for it, but just know that it's not all about starting salary, although I know that's important. But to do a lot of research, and don't just believe everything you see on the internet. That's all good. Every company is a good company on its website. So you got to dig deeper. You've got to talk to people who actually work there, look for the personal experience somehow. And I don't have all the answers on how to do that. How are you treated in a job interview? To me, those interviews go both ways. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So you need to have some confidence and take some pride in that, to ask some good questions of them as well about their culture and what it's like, and how much will they support you in your career, and et cetera, not just what you can provide for them. So a lot of different aspects. Just primarily to know what your values are and to find a company whose values align with yours. If you're a rock climber and all you want to do is take off on Friday afternoon and go climb rocks, then go work for Patagonia or some company like that. That's an exaggeration of what I'm talking about. But there are companies out there that just want to make a lot of money, and they want you to make a lot of money, and they're going to treat you like garbage. That's okay for some people that want to make a lot of money. Many of us, I left YKK for a few years, and I missed it. I missed the team. So leaving, I learned a lot about myself.
One thing I like to tell students, when I graduated from UGA in 1975, there were no jobs. It was, I had no idea. And you couldn't just go to Atlanta and start interviewing. I was in radio, television, broadcast news, go to a big, a station in Atlanta and ask for a job. And I remember the guy that interviewed me said, you need to go somewhere, go to a smaller market, Macon or Savannah, maybe Columbus, and, you know, start working there at the bottom and work your way up, and that's the way you do it and everything. And I understood that, but I was too impatient. Well, I ended up having that job at the bottom anyway. And so what I tell people is, don't worry so much about that first job. Don't give away your pride about that. It's really not important. Make sure it's in an area you care about, that has values like you admire and want. And if it's the lowest job on the totem pole, that's okay. Because let me tell you, that is a wonderful place to see everything else, to look at everybody else's job. And then if you are in a professional organization like I was in higher ed, PR and development and news, then you can see what other people do and you think, I don't really like what I'm doing, but that person over there is doing something that looks great to me. And so from that first job, you can look around and find out about the things you don't want to do and the things that you would like to do. And sometimes they're generic and they would apply in any kind of profession, or sometimes they're pretty topical and you know where to go. You need to know to go to Patagonia if that's what you want to do, is rock climb. So I think that's a real important thing for people who are graduating, to let go of the idea that you're going to get the best job that anybody's ever had for that first job. It may be, and you're all smart enough to handle that job and to do that job, but because you're new, you're going to hear that. How can I get experience if I don't have experience? And that's the typical dilemma when you're looking for a job and you're new. You don't have any experience and they need somebody with experience. Well, hire me, give me a try. But do it in a way that you can see what everybody else is doing and kind of find your place from that viewpoint where you're getting a paycheck and, you may not be making a lot of money, but you're at a place where you can look around.
Leighton, does that sound familiar? He and I were talking, and my advice to him is related to the young lady's question there, is if you select the company that you really want to work with and be a part of, I always talk about an interview where someone says, Alex, I have decided I want to work for YKK. My degree is in marketing, but to be honest with you, I'll take any job you have. I just want my foot in the door. I will prove myself to you. A year from now, you will be glad you hired me. Just give me that chance. And what you just said was a conversation that Leighton and I had. 50 years ago last month, I drove to Lyndhurst, New Jersey to begin my career at YKK, Tom. I had engineering degree from Georgia Tech, 3 years of naval service, and they paid me $9,000 a year. $9,000 a year. Times have changed.
That's exactly what I made when I worked at that AM radio station and learned how to, write copy for commercials. And we had obituaries every afternoon. And so it would, it was you make fun of everybody. Somebody would read the obituary and they'd say the pallbearers are this, this, and this. And I always thought it sounded like bears. And so I'd draw little pictures of pallbearers and try to crack them up so they couldn't read online. But, there were days, we had turntables at that time, 2 turntables, 2 cassette machines, your microphone and we called them pots, that was the volume, were all in front of you, and it was pretty complex, and I had trouble telling time. I needed a digital clock, because looking at a clock on the spur of the moment and saying, oh, it's 6:26, and blah, 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 that just seemed hard to me. I guess I was nervous, and that just was hard. And I remember days when we copy our news off of a ticker tape kind of thing. It came from AP on this long piece of paper, and I'd start a record and go back there and start chopping the news for the newscast coming up in 5 minutes, and suddenly my record would run out. Oh my Lord, you had to run dead air is the bane of any radio station. So you'd run down the hall, and hit a tape or hit another turntable or do something like that. Anyway, those are first jobs. You never forget all those things that you learned. I mean, I learned a lot. just doing that. And then it turned out to be I worked in a TV studio, public television, which was in Athens at that time, Georgia Public Television. And I was on the crew. I ran camera, I was a floor director, all these things. And we did the Vince Dooley show every week. And we were shooting film at that time, so it had to be processed and it had to be edited. And so our crew call would be 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. If the game was up in Nashville, it had to come back to Athens, edit that film. And so Vince Dooley would come walking in, at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we'd shoot the Vince Dooley show. And we had a live show every Monday, Atlanta Week in Review, and some really wonderful people from Atlanta would come and go through the news of the day, and that was live. So, those were networks. I was networking with those people. You just learn a lot. You need to be curious. I'm a very curious person. If I'm learning something, I'm happy. And that's what I realized at the radio station is that, I was at an AM station. Nobody listened to AM radio, number one. There was a FM station in the neighborhood, and I knew everybody was listening to that. But, I learned how to do all that stuff. And producing spots, and, it was reel-to-reel, audio tape. I know, just crazy. But I learned a lot. And as long as I realized as long as I was learning something, I was happy. I was learning something new, and I was looking around to see what else other people were doing in broadcasting.
When you get that job, your goal needs to be to make yourself indispensable, I think. There are different opinions of things, but take on the tough jobs that nobody wants to do, and then you do them and do them well, and suddenly people recognize you and start talking about you and realize you need a bigger title and more pay, and good things will come your way. But if you just love what you're doing and want to do more and want to take on the tough challenges, then you'll do fine.
I made $12,000 my first job at Clemson. Wow. And but I made around $9,000 at the TV station and the AM station. So things have changed. I thought $12,000. I would never see it. It was just the biggest thing that ever happened. Any other questions?
What other questions do we have? Question from Dr. Gower.
Good afternoon. My question is really for both of you. And it's a question about women's leadership in both the political and the business spheres. And Mrs. Kidd, I'll address my question to you first. What do you think are some unique female qualities that women can bring to leadership positions in politics and in business? And do you think that women are able to express those qualities in political and business cultures that have been shaped by men for centuries?
I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't plan that.
I'm glad he asked you.
Actually, I came up in the professional world at a very interesting time for women, and I'm sure Ms. Booker can tell us the same kinds of stories. It was the 70s. Ms. Magazine had just started coming out. Gloria Steinem was talking. It never occurred to me that I wouldn't have a career or work. So I guess I hit the job market feeling like that. But, and I wanted it all. I wanted to work and have a family and a husband. I wanted all that stuff. But I remember at that time, it was women had to be seen as almost manlike. There was a time in the 70s and 80s where you would wear a little tie. You had blouses that had little ties that, were supposed to kind of duplicate that a man would wear a tie. And I remember going to a seminar where a woman said, you should wear a belt. Men wear belts. It's a big symbol of, power and control to wear a belt. So, I came up in a time when, women were just being hired, and there was no trust that a woman could do the jobs, number one. At that time in TV, I've told some students this the other day, the weather girl was a what I called at that time, which was insensitive of me, platinum blonde bimbo. And they were not a meteorologist. They were an actress or some girl straight from, the college who could point at the map and, say something about the weather. Well, now, I know women who are meteorologists who are very serious about what they do. They're just as serious about the male weathermen. And I do think, to get to your point, I do think that women right now in this political climate, I do think female candidates are very attractive to the public because they're seen as less emotional, I'm going to say didactic maybe. They're sensitive. Women can read people very well. And I think right now is a good time for women in politics. Kathy Cox and I have known each other since before she was Secretary of State. Kathy hit everything at the right moment, and she was the right person. And she's smart, she carries herself well, she communicates well, and there's no doubt in anyone's mind that she knows what she's talking about. And so on the floor of the legislature, she really shone. And that's why she was elected to a statewide office, which is much harder than a state rep or a state senator, and did such a good job there. So I really think, now's a good time for women. I do think women are accepted much more, and I do think everyone's giving women a chance now to succeed. I think they're really evaluating people as a person and not just a male or a female. I think the positions women are getting more prevalent, and I do think that people are evaluating them in a non-sexist way and are excited to give them a try. And so the credibility in the political world right now, I think, is moving up for women. I would suggest that any of you thinking about politics, the women are being seen as equal now, and so that's a good thing. And sometimes they're being seen as more compassionate and slower thinking, not so quick to judge or fail. It's okay to fail. That was not something people said to me when I was growing up. And maybe they said it, but I didn't hear it. Perfectionism is a real thing, and it's not healthy. And so I think now telling people that you learn when you fail is the best thing you can do for students. And that's the best part about school, is that you can try and try again and fail and try again and learn something and try again. And that's what school is for. So go out there. I call them bold moves. In every job I've had, sometimes you kind of feel stagnant, like maybe the ideas aren't flowing, and then it's just like, well, what's a bold move, Well, that's risky, because you may fall flat on your face. But usually it pushes everybody forward when you try something new and different.
I'm afraid we are out of time for more questions, but I have a question to end with each of you. Alex and then Jane, if you could go back and tell your 20-year-old self something that you know now that you wish you would have known when you were, say, 18 or 20 or 22, what would it be? And Alex, if you will begin.
Related to what Jane just said, I think it would be not to take myself quite so seriously. And what I sincerely believe, again, dovetailing on what you said, is we learn just as much from our mistakes and our failures as we do from our successes. And I didn't realize that at the time. I can remember during some of my many failures, lying in bed just trying to breathe, the stress and all was so bad. And what I realize now, it was just a transition in my life, and there were other doors were being opened up. And I'm not just saying that, it is the truth. It's life pushing you in a different direction. And so just relax, it'll be okay.
Jane?
I do, it's much related to that. I was very opinionated and strong, and guess what? I was tunnel vision. I thought my vision was exactly what I was going to do. And so I would say, relax, open up your head and your heart, and do what feels good, do what you enjoy doing, and don't be so strict on yourself. You know, just enjoy, learn and enjoy, and try to, and those things will come. I believe the good things will come if you can step back and just do the best you can every day, and good things will open up for you. Opportunities will open up for you. And I think it's just good karma, you know. It'll happen if you'll relax and enjoy life.
Could I add one quick thing? I don't remember saying nearly enough about the wonderful team that I was a part of at YKK, and I give them credit for all of our successes, and I'll take responsibility for the failures.
I think Alex is exactly right. That humility that he has goes a long way when you've got those values that are the core of any business or any life. And so humility is key.
That's beautifully said, and a good note for us to end on. If you will join me all in please thanking our guests, Jane Kidd and Alex Gregory. I would, particularly for students, like to remind you about a few upcoming events. We have a leadership paddle to Aviation Island. That is for students in our Leadership Academy this Friday. It's going to be fun, and the weather is supposed to be beautiful. If you are interested in traveling with us to the European Parliament this summer, students, we have a virtual information session a week from today. You can learn more at gcsu.edu/leadership/France. And then in a few weeks' time, we are hosting a workshop called Leading Across Cultures, led by Marketa Lepikovsky, who is a specialist in intercultural communication. She's also one of our instructors in our France program, so you may enjoy, if you're interested in traveling to France, connecting with Dr. Lepikovsky at that event. So I urge you to, if you're interested in those, take a look and get registered. Again, if you do not follow us, please follow us online on social media at Lead Creatively. And with that said, please join me again in thanking our guests, Alex Gregory and Jane Kidd. Thank you all for being here.